so feeble. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart.
Back. Hopefully you all can hear us today. Two things off the top. Al Jazeera reports the new regime forces in Syria carry out some summary executions in Latakia, accusing those killed of being Syrian Arab army officers. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the commander of the new regime forces military operations room, stated today that his forces, quote, will not hesitate to hold criminals, killers, and security and military officials involved in the torture of Syrian people accountable. To this I say, pay less attention to what they say and more attention to what they do. Also, what can we expect going forward in occupied historic Palestine as the Trump Redux administration takes hold? Folks, let's connect some dots.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing and provocative in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. Today's episode, the issue before us is, what can we expect going forward in occupied historic Palestine as the Trump Redux administration takes hold? My guest is a journalist, Palestine activist, and author. His latest book is entitled Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. Robert Fantina. Robert, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So let's connect some dots. Before we get to Trump and Palestine, as I mentioned in the open, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the commander of the new regime forces military operations room, stated today that his forces will not hesitate to hold criminals, killers, and security and military officers involved in the torture of the Syrian people accountable. But just 2 days ago, mainstream media showed an interview and al-Jalani speaking publicly about women's rights, about tolerance, and how he has changed. It appears right now, and I know it's very early, but it appears right now that the U.S. has once again been involved in regime change, creating this incredible power vacuum and backing the very forces that the U.S. claims to be fighting, and similar to what we saw in Iraq and in Libya. Your thoughts, Robert Fantina?
There's so much here. One is that the current leader in Syria said that these people should be held accountable, and yes, they should be. However, they're entitled, like everyone else, to due process, which means arrest, charge, and a fair trial, which they're not getting. They're simply being executed if they're suspected of being involved in the previous regime and in the violations that the previous regime committed. So it is a situation of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. This one's going to be repressive, at least it's early days, as you mentioned. We don't know what's going to happen. But from current indications, it looks like it's going to be repressive. The United States will back it as it backed the Shah of Iran once back in the 50s when the U.S. overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran and installed the Shah, who was a brutal dictator, very repressive. But he did what the United States wanted. He recognized Israel, had fine relations with Israel, ignored the plight of the Palestinian people. That's what the United States wants in Syria. So they have been able to now overthrow the Syrian government through the so-called militants who have done this, and now they will cozy up to the U.S. government and do its bidding, possibly. Now, we will have to see how this plays out. The Syrian people have no affection for the U.S. government, and if the new government of Syria is able to negotiate its people to support U.S. policies, it's going to be through a lot of repression.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the 1953 Iranian coup. That was 71 years ago. And what a lot of people don't know, because they haven't studied it and because, of course, it isn't discussed on mainstream media, is I would say, and you would know this better than I, so please correct me if I'm off base here, but I would say that the current conflict that we are engaged in Iran is directly related to our intervention in 1953, the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected prime minister, the imposition of the Shah, his terrorist Savak police force, and that then forced a tectonic shift in the politics in Iran, which we are still dealing with the blowback, Thomas Johnson, the blowback today.
Yes, the United States government thought that once it had overthrown the democratically elected government and installed the Shah, that it would be business as usual, that the people would be repressed, the government would kill and imprison its enemies, so-called enemies, for decades to come. But after about 20 years, the people of Iran had enough. They couldn't take it anymore. And so they had a mainly peaceful revolution and overthrew the government. Then they severed ties with Israel, supported Palestine. The United States has since sanctioned Iran brutally, and yet the Iranian people continue to resist. They continue to flourish. It's difficult. Conditions in Iran are very difficult because of the economic sanctions that the United States has imposed, and also because of the frequent bombing by Israel, the assassination of its scientists, and so on. But the U.S. government felt it had resolved a, quote, problem back in 1953, but all they did was create a worse problem certainly for the people of Iran, and also for the United States. Where is diplomacy? Where is the concept of reaching out to people who believe differently than you do, that have different ideas and opinions on how their government should run than how you think their government should run? It's possible to have alliances with governments that one government disagrees with. But the United States isn't interested in that. The United States isn't interested in diplomacy. It's might makes right. It's our way or the highway. And that's what it is demonstrating now throughout the Middle East.
In fact, just so the people can understand, in 53, Mossadegh had decided that he wanted to nationalize Iranian oil. This may be a bit simplistic, but I think it is accurate. He wanted to nationalize Iranian oil so that he could generate more revenue for the Iranian government, so that he could improve the quality of living for Iranian people. And I don't remember if it was BP or Royal Dutch Shell that came to the United States and said, we can't have this. We cannot be we cannot be forced to pay more for oil than we were paying when we were stealing it from the country. Mm-hmm. And please go in and do something about this. So General Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. and Kermit Roosevelt, the nephew, I believe, of the former president, went in, fomented the coup, overthrew Mossadegh. I just want to give people that history so that they can understand the United States has been in the regime change game for 71 years, because as I understand it, that was the first U.S. overthrow regime change operation.
I agree. And also, it's important to note a point you brought up that I want to stress is that Mossadegh wanted to do something to benefit the people of Iran. The United States wanted to do something to benefit the wealthy elites in the United States. And when those two are juxtaposed, well, the people of Iran are going to lose.
Every time. And final point on the Syria thing, because we do want to get to, because I believe what's happening in Syria has now kind of obfuscated or covered up what's being done in historic Palestine. But watching Morning Joe this morning, they're talking about Assad as this evil dictator, and they keep making the point about him gassing his own people. And as I understand it, 90%, if not 100% of that story, thanks to Whitney Webb and others, has been proven to be a flat out lie. It just didn't happen. The white helmets, from what I understand, were not the folks with the white hats on the white horse saving everybody. They were actually the ones that were involved in these incredibly heinous actions. It was not Assad. It was the white helmets backed by the United States.
The White Helmets is certainly a terrorist organization, despite their attempted PR to make themselves look like they were heroes. They were not. They were our terrorists. And regarding the chemical weapons attack, that alleged incident happened during the Trump administration. So Trump immediately ordered a major bombing of parts of Syria, even though his military people said we have no evidence that this is true. It's been stated, but there's no proof of it, and there's never been any proof demonstrated. Now, Assad was hardly an angel. There was a lot of oppression, but let's accuse him of what he's guilty of rather than making up things like the chemical weapons. And as long as we're talking about chemical weapons, why is Israel allowed to use chemical weapons against the Palestinians that's been documented by several sources, when one accusation against Assad resulted in the United States bombing Syria, even when that accusation, there was no evidence at that time, and no evidence has been produced since then.
Let's move forward to another area in the region and the really the basis of our conversation today. This past March, former President Trump, now President-elect Trump, said that he would have responded the same way as Israel did after the October 7th attack by Hamas, but urged the country, that being Israel, to finish up, his words, its offensive in Gaza and, quote, get this over with, end quote, warning about international support fading. Quote, you have to finish up your war. You have to finish it up. You've got to get it done, end quote. He said this in an interview with the Israeli newspaper Israel Hayom, quote, we've got to get to peace. You can't have this going on. And I will say Israel has to be very careful because you are losing a lot of the world. You are losing a lot of support. I use that as the basis of the question. What are your thoughts? How does all of this portend for the Palestinian struggle as we're transitioning out of the Biden administration to an incoming Trump administration?
Well, first, I want to mention that the American voter had no choice. They could, as far as there were choices in third-party candidates, but as far as the major party candidates, they could vote for someone who supports genocide or they could vote for someone who supports genocide. So between Biden and Harris, there was no difference there. Now, I'm sorry, between Trump and Harris, there was no difference there.
Well, no, you're right. Between Biden and Harris, there was no choice either, because when she was asked, what are the major differences between an incoming Harris administration and the outgoing Trump administration, she says, not much.
Right. And I do think a decisive statement from her on support for international law and human rights might have made the difference in this past election, but that's history, that's speculation. But going forward, we have to look at some of the statements as far as what's going to happen in Palestine. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, has talked about what desirable beachfront property Gaza has. So he envisions building luxury condos there on the bodies and blood of people who've been victims of genocide. Donald Trump has said that if the hostages aren't released by the time he gets into office, the Middle East will see bombing like it's never seen before. Now, he's never said anything about the political prisoners, thousands of them in Israeli jails, who are being held in horrific conditions. These conditions have been documented by independent journalists and news programs, but they're not ever mentioned. So the 100 or so hostages in Gaza are always being talked about, but these other political prisoners, some as young as 12 years old, don't come to Trump's attention. So during the first Trump administration, he recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, which the international community does not. He has said he will recognize any annexation that Israel chooses to make in Palestine. And of course, Israel wants all of Palestine, and that's why it's currently slaughtering Palestinians to get them out of the way. So there's going to be no diplomacy, no recognition of the rights of the Palestinian people, of their claims, their claims dating back millennia of the land on which they live. There's going to be no recognition that they're human beings, and that's the key issue here. Donald Trump is racist, he's Islamophobic, among other things, and he will be happy to see the Palestinians slaughtered, expelled, and then completely ignored. So unless the international community steps up in a major way, it's going to be this genocide is going to continue until it's complete.
You just said that the Zionist colony wants all of Palestine, and there are two phrases that I'd like for you to elaborate on. One is, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. That has been described or portrayed as this racist trope that Palestinians are using, calling for the extermination of Jews. And the other one is a land without a people for a people without a land. I think talking about those two phrases in the same context, I think will provide an incredible amount of light to the reality of this phrasing, as opposed to how it's being spun and used by the media against the very people that are being that are the victims of genocide.
Yes, and those are two very interesting statements. One, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. One of the solutions, proposed solutions to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, if we call it that, is for one democratic state in which all Palestinians would be free, all Israelis would be free. Now, Israel will never allow this because it has defined Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people and only the Jewish people. But that's when people talk about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Yes, Palestine will be free, living in ideally in peace and harmony with their Israeli neighbors. So this isn't a matter of genocide, it's a matter of inclusion. Also, when people try to imply that means that the Palestinians want to exterminate the Jews, we have to look at the reality. The Palestinians, if they wanted to, which they don't, have no means to do that. However, the Israelis do have the means to exterminate the Palestinians, and that is exactly what they're doing. And the world is sitting back and watching it happen. As far as territory, the Israel with United States, full United States backing and financing, continues to steal Palestinian land, reducing the size of Palestine repeatedly. There's something like 800,000 illegal settlers, and under international law, occupying country cannot move its residents or citizens into the occupied territory on a permanent basis. Netanyahu has said none of these settlers will ever have to leave. So this is all violation of international law. Now, regarding the expression a land for people,
a land without a people for a people without a land.
Okay, so people forget or unaware that when the so-called nation of Israel was established, 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes. They had no say in the matter. They had no redress. They were not compensated in any way. Over 500 Palestinian villages were bulldozed, and the Israeli settlers came in. This was not a land without people. This was a land that was populated with way over 1 million people. A huge amount of them, as I mentioned, were expelled from the land. It was a land where people farmed. They had businesses. It was a country like any other country, and yet the United Nations, in its great wisdom, decided to expel 750,000 people. About 10,000 were killed at that time, drive them from their homes into refugee camps, where some of them who were babies at the time are still living, and where the descendants are still living, some in Gaza and some in neighboring countries, Lebanon being a major one, for example. So this is a lie that has been bought by many people, although it is gradually being exposed for what it is. And I'm glad for the opportunity to be here today to further expose as a lie. Some people, politicians, have talked about how, Israel just blossomed in the desert and all this. Well, if you gave Palestine the billions upon billions of dollars that the United States has given Israel over the years, and if you protected Palestine from every violation of international law, then it too would blossom in the desert. But it was blossoming beforehand. As I said, farms, businesses, schools, recreation activities, churches, mosques. People live there as they live in any other country, but that was all taken from them, and then they were forbidden and prevented from rebuilding due to Israeli and U.S. policies.
Jay writes, Fantina just revealed his position to be, quote, two-state, end quote, quote, living in peace with their Israeli neighbors, end quote. This is a Zionist myth. I didn't hear you, Robert, articulate your position. What I thought I heard you explaining were the two major opposing positions, not stating a preference for either. I've known you for a while, and I think Jay, well, before I get to my analysis of that, please clarify.
Yes, what I said was that the one of the alternatives that has been discussed is a one democratic state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians would live in the same communities and work in the same jobs and so on. Another solution is having two separate states, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, side by side. As far as my preference doesn't matter. What matters is the preference of the Palestinian people, who have to have a right, which they're guaranteed, the right to decide their own future, decide their own country on the borders that were created by the United Nations in 1947, 1948. So I didn't specify that I support one or the other, but I don't really have a preference. I want to support what the Palestinians' right to self-determination.
And the reason that I thank you very much for explaining that, because as Shelley just said, people don't listen. And I'm not going to say that regarding to Jay, because I don't know Jay. What I will say is people have a tendency to listen through a channel that primarily validates their own position instead of listening clearly to what is being said. Many people will tend to inject their own bias into what was said as opposed to clearly understanding what was said. There was another question here. What are the likely outcomes for Palestinians and Israelis if settlement expansion and land dispossession continue unchecked?
Well, the likely alternative, the likely outcome, is that the Palestinians will be forced out of Palestine because they'll either live as second-class citizens in Israeli illegally occupied territory, or they'll simply have to leave the country if they can. It's very, very difficult for people in Palestine to be able to leave Palestine. So if the settlements continue unchecked, they will be a step above slave labor to Israelis in Israel. They will not have the right to vote, to own property, to travel, to speak freely. So it will be continued repression of their rights, which they're experiencing now in the West Bank and Gaza, and were even before this genocide started. They're extremely limited in the rights they have because Israel and the United States violate their human rights on a daily basis and have for decades.
Hence the International Criminal Court charging Netanyahu and Gallant and others with genocide. Netanyahu claims with war crimes. Netanyahu claims occupied Golan Heights will be Israeli for eternity. The occupied, and folks, there's a reason why the space is always referred to as occupied. That seems to get missed in a lot of mainstream analysis. But anyway, the occupied Syrian Golan Heights will be Israeli for eternity, said Netanyahu in a speech this past Monday after 60 years of confrontations with Syria. Speaking in occupied Al-Quds, Netanyahu thanked Trump for recognizing Israel's 81 annexation of the territory during his first term and stated the Golan will be part of the state of Israel for eternity. A couple of things. One, Robert, getting back to the point about the reference to occupied, even Gaza is considered and referenced internationally as the occupied territory. And also the annexation here is illegal as well.
Yes, there are a few very good points there. One, it is illegal under international law for a country to gain territory through conquest. And that is what Israel is attempting to do. Secondly, the fact that Donald Trump has recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel and it recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel doesn't mean the world does it. The United States is not the world. Most of the world community does not recognize the annexation, does not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and does not recognize the legality of the settlements in the West Bank. You also mentioned that even before the genocide, the Gaza Strip was considered occupied, even though the Israeli soldiers or terrorists left a number of years ago. But the United Nations determined, because of the total blockade by land, sea, and air, it was still considered occupied. So these are, it's become normalized. The occupation of Palestine has simply become normalized over the last 70 years, and especially over the last 35 or so, or 40. And people just don't understand what it means. This is one country, one nation has taken over another nation, is controlling every aspect of it. Its legal framework, its educational framework, its industry, its economy, everything against the wishes of the occupied people. It's a violation of international law, has been since the United Nations, shortly after the United Nations was established. But because it's become normalized, people don't consider it anymore. And now with Donald Trump, a racist, he's Islamophobic, working in tandem with Netanyahu and his racist cabinet, the future of the Palestinian people, unless the international community steps up, is very bleak indeed.
In fact, in this same speech, Netanyahu underscored that Israeli occupation forces control of the high ground ensures security and sovereignty. That to me is an oxymoron, because you can't be an occupying force and then claim sovereignty. If you understand the definition of sovereignty, which I do, you can't be an occupying force and claim that you're the sovereign. Those two things are inconsistent, incongruent, Robert.
And that's why Netanyahu is going to annex more and more territory, because then it's not occupied anymore. He will say it's part of Israel, and therefore that's just the way it is. So he's trying to work around these legal definitions, but that doesn't. Annexation is illegal. Occupation is illegal. So he can't continue to do this with a complete impunity. But apparently the international community is saying that he can, being supported by the United States.
And again, folks, I'm stressing this point because we hear this terminology so often, but very few people really understand what sovereignty is. Israel is not the sovereign. They do not have the legal right to control that defined space with force as they are doing. That is in violation of international law. Thereby, it's not sovereign. Words, Robert, words have meaning.
Yes.
That there's a reason why you're not speaking Chinese and I'm not speaking, I don't know, French. Words have meaning, Robert.
Yes, they do. And by trying to erase those meanings and change them to say that Israel is a sovereign over all of Palestine, it just makes no sense. It's just not. The words strung together have no meaning, because Palestine is an independent nation. It's recognized by about 120, 130 nations in the United Nations, not as many as Israel is, but certainly a significant number of them. So it's recognized as a sovereign nation under occupation, which is a temporary measure. It's only allowed in time of war and extreme circumstances, and yet it has been occupied for at least since the 1960s, and some will argue since 1948. But Israel is not the sovereign over Palestine. It just makes no sense. It's like saying France is sovereign over Italy. It just doesn't make sense. The words don't make sense when strung together that way.
So, folks, I think it's important to also appreciate that what is happening in Syria, as I said earlier, is obfuscating the ongoing atrocities being committed by the settler colonial state known as Israel against Palestinians. Israel attacks kill at least 34 more Palestinians in Gaza. One attack on a house in Beit Hanun, northern Gaza, killed at least 25. They targeted a house in Beit Hanun, northern Gaza, which has been under total siege since October, a part of this ethnic cleansing campaign. I wanted to bring this out because, again, I believe that the ongoing conflict in Syria is now obfuscating this genocide it's basically taken Palestine off the map. I mean, not off the map. It's taken Palestine out of the headlines. Robert Fantina.
It's true. We're reading about 25 people, most members of one family being slaughtered, dozens here, dozens there, and it's not getting publicity anymore. And another thing related to that I want to mention is that a week or so ago, 2 weeks now, another Security Council resolution was vetoed by the United States, one that would have caused a ceasefire. And a spokesperson, Matthew Miller, the U.S. spokesman, one of them, said that the reason that the U.S. government vetoes things like that. Well, that was vetoed because it didn't require the hostages to be released prior to the ceasefire. It was going to be part of the ceasefire agreement. But what Miller said when talking about the arrest warrant for Netanyahu was that the U.S. Has questions about the ICC and ICJ's jurisdiction, and that since the U.S. doesn't recognize Palestinian as an independent nation, then it has no jurisdiction. So apparently what he's saying is it's okay to slaughter Palestinians because they don't, the U.S. doesn't recognize their country. So we get back to this, what you were saying about these continued raids that are killing dozens of people at a time in Palestine. We're talking about men, women, and children, and the United States doing nothing to stop it. The excuses that the United States gives, and the fact that the overthrow of the Syrian government that has now occurred, these are taking away from attention on the suffering people in Gaza. I'm in sporadic contact with a few people in Gaza, and the conditions there are horrific. They're beyond what I can imagine. And these people don't know if they're going to be alive in 5 minutes after our call, after our contact. But the United States is allowing this to happen, and is not only allowing it, but is causing it to happen by providing all the weapons. So I've veered away a little bit from your question.
No.
But the fact that what's happening in Syria now, which is certainly big news, is detracting from what's happening in Gaza, which is really bigger news. Because can there be bigger news than genocide? Overthrow of the government is big news, that's certain. And what's going to happen there is certainly newsworthy, needs to be analyzed, explored, and followed, and so on. But genocide is happening and has been happening for over a year. There should be no distraction from that.
And to that point, these events are inextricably linked, even though the United States, through Western media and its operatives, continue to try to make these things as though what? They're occurring in a vacuum. And they're not, which is why here on Connecting the Dots, we're connecting these dots, Robert Fantina.
Yes, and what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Palestine, didn't happen in a vacuum. Even when after the October 7th resistance, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said that the people of Palestine have seen their dreams shattered for years, their houses stolen, their land stolen, their people killed. So then they resist. And then all of a sudden, this is a horrible thing that the Palestinians have done to the Israelis. Well, it wasn't done in a vacuum. It was done in response to the complete repression and deprivation of the human rights of the Palestinian people. It's just now, when October 7th happened, the U.S. government and other governments said, well, Israel has the right to defend itself. There is no regulation in international law that says an occupying power has the right to defend itself from the occupied. If the United States invades Canada, yes, Canada has the right to defend itself. But when an occupied country resists, which international law says it has the right to resist by any means at its disposal, including armed struggle, then the occupier isn't defending itself, it's just further repressing the people that it occupies.
And a very simplistic analogy of this is, I cannot come into your home armed, stealing your property, have you repel me with arms, and then claim I am defending myself as I have invaded your home, stealing your property. That doesn't fly not only on any court on the planet, it doesn't fly on any court in the universe. And I am very familiar with universal law. So to your point about the horrific existence, Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prison stricken with food poisoning from spoiled meals. a significant number of detainees under interrogation at Etzion suffered from poisoning due to spoiled food served to them by the prison administration. A lawyer for the Commission of Detainees Affairs, after visiting 9 prisoners this past weekend, relayed that they had suffered poisoning after displaying symptoms following their meals. This is not the first instance of these individuals being poisoned. Amani Sarhana, the media coordinator for the Palestinian Prisoner Society, told the investigators that that Etzion serves as a temporary detention and investigation center where prisoners are later transferred to other facilities. It currently holds 111 detainees. And so, as unfortunate as it was for individuals to have been captured on the 7th of October, very few people talk about the hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians that have been illegally imprisoned by the Zionist forces. Robert, as you said, children even as young as 12 years old. And here we have in one facility 111 detainees that are being subjected to food poisoning.
And another thing we need to know about these and other political prisoners in Palestine is that they can be held indefinitely without charge, without access to legal advice, without access to families. So they have administrative detention. Israeli forces say that there's some reason that these people are a security threat, and so they're arrested. They don't know what they're charged with. As I said, they don't have access to legal advice. And they're put in these, they can be held for 6 months, but at the end of that 6 months, that can be renewed for another 6 months. And many, many prisoners, hundreds if not thousands, have been detained and continue to be detained for years at a time without any charges being levied against them. So this is one of the injustices that the Israeli government perpetrates on people. You mentioned the food poisoning. CNN, which is hardly a progressive news station, did an investigation on another prison in Israel and found horrific conditions of torture and sexual abuse, food deprivation, sleep deprivation, and so on. Well, then Israel said, well, they're not using that one anymore. But there was no recognition that it was wrong. The United States didn't condemn Israel for it. Imagine if Russian prisoners, or say Ukrainian prisoners in Russia, were being held in these conditions. The United States would be bombing Russia. Also, I'll also mention that it is illegal for an occupying country to arrest members of the occupied country and imprison them outside of the occupied territory. So every Palestinian who's arrested in Palestine and moved to an Israeli jail, that represents a violation of international law. But again, the United States, or Israel and the United States, don't care about international law.
And to that point, Robert, I think it's very important with all that you've just articulated for people to really understand. I'll speak on behalf of myself, and then I'll let you elaborate from your side, which is all you want is consistency. You want honesty, you want consistency. So if we should be appalled as Syrian prisoners are being released now, and we're being told that they've been held in darkness and they've been held in all these horrific, torturous conditions, as many of them may well have been, and that is horrific. Nobody wishes that upon anybody. If we as Americans are supposed to be aghast at that, then we should also be as upset, as aghast as what the Zionist settler colonial state is doing to Palestinians, who, by the way, are resisting occupation. There was a time when the United States had some level of moral authority, at least we thought we did. When we would talk about operating on behalf of human rights, there was a time when many people engaged in freedom struggles look to the United States as that example. I think we have forever lost that moral high ground. Robert Fantina.
And the United States never deserved that moral high ground anyway.
Correct.
It was always interested in power and profits from its earliest days. But to hear now, you talk about consistency, and yes, people are horrified by what happened to prisoners in Syria, and I'm horrified by it too. But I'm also horrified by what's happening to Palestinians in Israeli prisons. But other people, well, not so much. Partly because there's very little publicity about it. Partly because the narrative is that they somehow deserve it. They are somehow, well, after all, they're Arab, they're Muslim, they're not the same as us, and therefore they don't have the same rights we have. They don't feel the same way we feel. This is racism at its core, and the U.S. government and the media, most of the mainstream media, for lack of a better term, simply parrots what the government tells them to say, or what the government says. And so this narrative that all Arabs are terrorists has been ingrained in people. Now they're seeing it differently now when they're seeing pictures of children crying in the streets, trembling in the streets of Gaza because of the bombs. Their parents are gone. They're alone. These are toddlers. People are saying, well, maybe there is something wrong here. And it's long past time for them to come to that realization. But the United States has controlled the narrative. The United States in different wars has had an actual department of propaganda in order to foster the U.S. narrative. And while there isn't anything official now, it's certainly done through the news media and through influence. If news medias want access to major politicians in the United States to interview them and so on, then they need to play the game, and they're willing to do so. So the U.S. government officials know this, and they use that to demonize Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in general, and to deify, if I can use that term, Israelis. And this is, people through social media are seeing the reality more and more, but it's taken a long time, and we're not where we need to be yet.
In fact, people are seeing this reality through social media, which is one of the reasons why there's a direct attack on social media. But let's connect a couple of other dots here. As we're talking about Syrian prisoners being released, as we talk about the horrific conditions in which innocent Palestinians are being detained, being held, being tortured, and U.S. dollars being used to do this, we also have to connect the dots in terms of the United States, in terms of free Mumia Abu Jamal, free Leonard Peltier, who's 80 years old. Let's be sure that Assata Shakur should be able to return free from exile in Cuba to the United States. Folks, for those of you watching or listening to this that don't know these names, look up Mumia Abu Jamal. Look up Leonard Peltier. Look up Assata Shakur, and you will see again connecting some dots here. And there are a whole lot of other political prisoners that are languishing in American prisons. Those are three of the more famous names. There's another element to this, Robert, that I thought in terms of connecting the dots. Yemen's Ansar Allah, they've attacked U.S. destroyers and merchant ships in the Gulf of Aden. CENTCOM has said that the destroyers intercepted multiple drones and one cruise missile. Yahya Syria said the attack, speaking on behalf of Ansar Allah, said the attack, quote, achieved its objectives, end quote, while CENTCOM said the attack was, quote unquote, defeated. Robert, I always suggest that people look at a map of the region when they read these stories. So Ansar Allah, for all intents and purposes, controls the Red Sea, which is off of its west coast. It is also demonstrating that it can influence, if not shut down, merchant maritime traffic in the Gulf of Aden, which is off of its southern coast. Final point, Iran has demonstrated it can shut down the Persian Gulf. Robert Fantina.
The United States is very vulnerable in that part of the world. And in order to show its strength, it has to proclaim that any resistance, any defense by Yemen or any other country has been defeated, and that it wasn't a success at all, and it's business as usual. So again, we talked about propaganda and the narrative that the United States wants the world to hear. But as you pointed out, when you look at the facts, when you look at who controls which areas and who has the upper hand, then the U.S. statements about the ineffectiveness of these attacks has to be taken very lightly, because if the U.S. were so invincible in that area, then the problems that are going on now and the issues that are being faced wouldn't exist. But the U.S. has to proclaim and has to say, regardless of what happens, that it is victorious in all things, that it is invincible, and that no one can possibly thwart its geopolitical goals. However, the reality we're seeing on the ground is far different.
In fact, I want to dig a little deeper into this point. Yahya Syria said that the attack achieved its objectives. CENTCOM says the attack was defeated. Well, I don't know that CENTCOM knows what Ansar Allah's objectives were in the attack, first of all. Secondly, I wonder if the motivation behind this attack was not to sink the destroyer or to damage the destroyer, but to send a message: we're out here, we can tap you when we want to, very similar to the message that Russia sent when it sent that hypersonic missile into Ukraine that wasn't nuclear armed. But Russia was sending a very clear message to Ukraine, to NATO, to the West: we've got this. Do not force us to use this. Do not force us to escalate this. For it reminds me of my father sitting in his chair, looking over the top of his glasses and his newspaper, and me saying, "Look, son, you really don't want me to get out of this chair, do you?" You know what? No, Dad. Sit where you are. Let's see if we can figure out another way to solve this issue.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, and that.
And you don't even know you didn't even know my father.
I don't. But the Yemen has become much stronger in the last several years. It has demonstrated that strength on a number of occasions. Prior to the uneasy truce with Saudi Arabia, it certainly demonstrated that strength. It has since the Israeli genocide in Gaza has begun. And I think this recent drone attack was exactly what you said. It was telling the United States, back off, because we can do a lot of damage if we choose to. So I think that was probably what they saw as success. I don't think they expected a huge amount of damage to be done by this minor drone attack, but they did let the United States know that we're here, we have the capability, and leave us alone and stop your unqualified support for the Zionist regime and genocide, or we're going to really get down to business.
Now, this next statement takes me right to my next point. Muslim Revert says, Russia is weak, bro. Talk a little bit about the difference between restraint and fear, because I think there are a lot of people that are saying, well, Iran hasn't responded yet, they must be afraid. Lebanon hasn't responded. Hezbollah hasn't responded to the degree that they're threatening to. They must be afraid. Russia is losing in Ukraine. Explain, particularly because we're talking about resistance movements, the strategy of resistance movements is different. And so if you're in the West, if you're in the United States and you're used to knee-jerk reaction, shock and awe,
Mm-hmm.
Shock and awe didn't work in Iraq.
No.
It worked for Lockheed Martin and a whole bunch of other military manufacturers that spent a whole lot of weaponry, but you didn't win. So explain the difference, if you could, Robert, between restraint and fear.
Yeah, and there you gave several good examples. One, let's look at Lebanon for a minute. Israel decided to go into a ceasefire with Lebanon because it knew it couldn't be victorious there. It couldn't achieve its goals. They were being repulsed at the borders at every step of the way. And so the Lebanon, Hezbollah at this point got what it wanted. It has shown its strength to Israel. It has expelled Israel again. And so it doesn't need to do anything more drastic at this point. There's a ceasefire, and we'll see where it goes from here. Hezbollah will certainly rebuild, and we'll see what happens after that. But they don't have to prove anything because they've already done so. Now with Iran, there was a response to Israel's bombing, and now they're waiting for the next response. We also don't know what behind the scenes actions are going on. How much is the United States involved with trying to convince Iran and Israel to lower the temperature? Because what the United States doesn't want is a major Middle East war. Minor Middle East wars are fine. The United States will always foster those and make money from those. But something that may involve nuclear weapons is not something the United States is willing to risk. It at least under the Biden administration, we'll see what happens under Trump. At least people in the Biden administration know that there will be no limited nuclear war. It will be a worldwide disaster. So Iran, the Iranian government, is biding its time, doing what it needs to do, seeing what, if anything, Israel decides to. If Israel makes another move, assassinates another scientist or bombs another city, then we're going to see a major response. But for now, the Iranian government feels it's made its point, and it's in a kind of a waiting game. And again, there might be diplomatic efforts, especially with China. Remember that a few years ago, China brokered an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China may be working behind the scenes now to lower tensions in the Middle East. So we'll see what happens. But as far as fear, I don't think fear comes into the Iranian equation or the equation in Hezbollah either, because these are countries whose people support them. The people have very strong feelings of patriotism. They're proud of their countries. They're proud of their militaries, and they're not fearful of what Israel and the United States can do.
In fact, and Shelley H., thank you very much for that super sticker. We greatly appreciate that. And folks, just let me quick pitch here. We're doing this here for you, but we can't do this without you. So we do need, in order for this program to continue, we do need your financial support. We can't do this without it. Robert, following up on your point, I also think it's important for people to understand that we're dealing with, as you look at the West and you look at what's happening with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, you look at what's happening with Iran, you look at what's happening with Ansar Allah, you're dealing with cultures that are thousands of years old. And so they have a totally different understanding of the concept of time. Hence the phrase, you have the watches, we have the time. We're talking about thousands and thousands of years. The wheel was invented. In the wheel, folks. You know that round thing when you go out and look at your car that's not square but round and allows your car to go down the street? The wheel was invented in this region. These are smart people. Cataract surgery was invented in Iran. The aqueduct system of watering crops was invented in Iran. Folks, these are smart people. So, Robert, when they say it isn't over, they're not talking today, tomorrow, or they're talking about this ain't over till it's over, Robert Fantina.
Yeah, it's true. The perspective of time is very different. The United States is always worried about.
And how important is that point?
Oh, it's vitally important. And the United States sees it as weakness when other governments throughout the Middle East see it as a strength, that we're not going to do the knee-jerk reaction that you mentioned before. We are going to bide our time because we have all the time we need, as has been demonstrated by how old for example, Iranian civilization is. And so it's not necessary to respond immediately. Look at Israel, the country, the alleged country, is 75 years old. And compare that to Iran. Iran hasn't invaded another country in over 400 years. Israel and the United States are forever invading and attacking other countries because it's a knee-jerk reaction. It's the need. I need these profits. I need this power right now. I don't care what my people want. I don't care what the people in other countries want. The leaders are looking for power and profits. And if that involves bombing today, then we'll bomb today. We look at the Iranian government. They are saying our people need prosperity. They need freedom. They need self-determination, which they have at this point. And if another country is violating that, well, we will deal with it as we need to on an as-needed basis, rather than deciding to blow up some other country because they might in the future cause us problems.
And also one of the things that does, and Sherry, thank you, $20 super sticker. Thank you very, very much for that. We truly, truly appreciate it. That might help us stay on until next month. Now I forgot my point. We're talking about restraint and the fact that if you're dealing with Hezbollah and if you're dealing with Iran, you're dealing with Muslims, and that within the Holy Quran, there are rules of war beyond the Geneva Convention, beyond any other type of treaty or agreement between countries. There are rules of war that true Iranian countries follow. And one of those elements, which is why Iran doesn't have a nuclear missile today, is because there's a serious, serious problem with killing civilians in a military conflict.
Yes. One of the major speakers from centuries ago, Imam Reza, has said that it's completely wrong to kill another human being because by doing that, you're really killing society. You're killing rationality, he said. So the idea of killing people is just foreign and is disgraceful to many Muslims. This is not obviously true with Israelis who are and with people in the American government who are willing to kill tens of thousands, millions of people. The United States is estimated to have killed 20 million people since the end of World War II, and that number is ever increasing. So the United States doesn't view human life with the same value that many Eastern cultures do. And we're seeing that as it operates through Israel in Gaza and in Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East. But the Muslim view holds life much more sacredly than many Western cultures do.
In fact, listening to you with that very apt description, and unemployed sent us $2 on a super sticker and another $2. Thank you very much. We greatly from unemployed. So those of you that are employed, follow unemployed's lead and make something happen. But again, now I forgot my point. Collateral damage. I need to talk to some imams to see if the concept of collateral damage is acceptable within the Islamic faith, because I don't believe that's another $2 from unemployed scholar. Appreciate it. I don't know that the idea or the concept of collateral damage is an operational concept within Islam, since there is a prohibition on taking human life. And the opposite of that is when the United States does its military math and there is something called military math, they look at, well, we're going to use this particular weapon. It's got this megatonnage, or it's got this impact. It's going to hit this target. And as a result, we expect X number of innocent people to die. Well, that X is called collateral damage. And that's just the cost of doing business. That's just the ugly side of warfare. Islam doesn't operate like that, Robert Fantina.
No, the idea of collateral damage, it sounds so nice. It's so benign. Oh, a house was damaged. Collateral damage is human beings being blown to bits, being killed, dying, horrific deaths, sometimes killed instantly, sometimes suffering agonizing deaths. Now, they weren't the target, but they were in the way. Now, Israel is saying that it has to bomb hospitals, mosques, refugee centers, schools, places that it says were safe because there are Hamas members operating there. So,
okay, wait a minute. Because to that point, there is a software program invented by the IDF. I think it's called Daddy's Home. And what it does, through the use of cell phone technology, they follow their targets throughout the space. And when the target reaches home, that's when they strike, so that they not only hit the target, they kill the family as well.
And that's intentional. That is intentional.
It's a software program.
Yeah. If they wanted to kill the target, which is morally wrong anyway, if they wanted to, they could do so when he's in the street. But instead, they wait until he's home with his wife, children, grandchildren, whoever else is there, and then they bomb the building. So his family, people, otherwise, if it's an apartment, other people living there all die, and they are collateral damage because they weren't the intended target, ostensibly, but they happen to be in the way. They were only in the way because the Israeli government waited until they happened by coincidence to be in the way, and that's when they decided to strike.
I take issue with that, Robert. I don't think it's as benign as in the way. I think it's intentional. Hence, they designed a software program to accomplish this end, I believe, to send a message to other families. You do not want to go the way as your next door neighbor just went, and have your family subjected to this being eviscerated, because you can play this game of resistance if you want to, but we're going to take out everybody in your family. I don't think it's in the way. I think it is by design.
Well, I think it's very intentional. But what they can say is then, well, we went after this target.
Okay, yeah, what they can say.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's definitely intentional. Otherwise, why wouldn't they, if they want to assassinate someone, do it while he's in the street, hit him with a drone? But no, they wait until he's home and then bomb the building that he's in so that they can kill everyone in the building. That's genocide. It's killing innocent people simply because of their nationality. These are Palestinians. They're of Arab descent, and therefore they're expendable and they must be removed. And the one of the Israeli spokesmen at the start of this genocide said, we're talking about human animals here, that there's no one innocent, no one is in Gaza is not affiliated with Hamas, they should all be killed. And that's what he said. And that's the policy that they have implemented since then.
And that's what is also called collective punishment, which, by the way, folks, is a war crime. An unemployed scholar, again, I think now you're up to $8 or $10. Thank you so much. Robert, Cherie says, I want to thank you, Dr. Wilmer, for introducing me to new scholars like Robert Fantina and others. And so, Robert, to that point, your latest book, Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. Please talk about the focus of your work and your latest book.
Well, my work is involved in human rights and international law. My latest book compares the situations in Palestine and Kashmir. They're very, very similar. The Kashmiri people are under the same kinds of repression, brutal repression by India that the Palestinians are by Israel. They suffer the same I mentioned administrative detention, where political prisoners can be held indefinitely without charge. That's true in Palestine and in Kashmir. There's sexual abuse. There's torture in jails. There's the same kind of the desire to annex the entire territory, and the violence, the brutality. The Kashmir is the most heavily military occupied country on the planet. I don't know what the exact ratio is, but for every 10 or 15 Kashmiris, there is a soldier, an Indian soldier in Kashmir. So it's violations of international law. It's gross violations of human rights. It's these violations are committed with complete impunity, as in Israel, when something reaches a stage of publicity that people are questioning it, the Israeli government says we are doing an investigation, and 99% of the time, is the Israeli government decides that it was completely innocent. It acted according to law and to its regulations. The same is true when there are horrific violations of human rights in Kashmir. Occasionally, the Indian government will say, "Well, we'll do an investigation." Oh, we investigated. Everything is fine. Our soldiers acted completely under legal international law. And then the United States especially, but the rest of the world says, oh, okay, as long as you've checked it out, we're happy with it. And yet the suffering of the people of Kashmir and suffering of the people of Palestine are incomprehensible to people who have not experienced it.
And let me see here now. Sherry says, where was that? Wait a minute. I'll find it. Oh, I'm sorry. Shelly H says, great guest. Let's buy his books. Hey, Shelly, that's a great idea. Everybody,
Thank you very much,
well, after you all send your super sticker to the show, then you should go out and buy Robert's books. Shelly, great point. And Daniel Drazenovich says, nationalism and militarism leads to dehumanization, and then follows it up with a super sticker. So Daniel, and you are absolutely, because actually, Robert, you really can't sell these atrocities to the general public without dehumanizing the targets. In fact, referring to them as, in fact, I remember during the war in Afghanistan, they were back to the cellular phone. They were using these drones as fake cell towers. And when the person they were targeting would then use his or her cell phone, it would ping off of the drone, give the location of the individual they were targeting, and then a missile would find its way. And they called it killing phones. They didn't call it killing people. They called it killing phones. And what is important for people to realize is the cell phone usage in many Middle Eastern and other countries is different than it is in the West. In the West, phones tend to be incredibly personal. I have a phone, my son has a phone, my wife has a phone. Whereas in a lot of these other countries, because of poverty and other things, one phone may be used by 10 or 12 people, depending on the time of day and the day. So you lock in on a phone thinking you're hitting a particular subject, you might be killing that person's kid. Robert.
Right. And there's no concern about that. That's okay. Well, we'll get the target next time. And well, maybe next time it's his wife holding it, or next time it's his grandchild. Oh, well, we'll just try again. There's no respect for human life. And I just said one phone for a family. Part of that is because the concept of family is so different. Why do we need separate phones? We're family. I use it. Well, why would we have separate? We don't have separate houses. Why would we have separate phones? So we go back to the idea of the dehumanization. That I forget who it was who said they're human animals. They must be exterminated. I
think it was Gallant.
It's been said that if a black man commits a crime, he's a thug. If a Muslim man commits a crime, he's a terrorist. And if a white man commits a crime, well, he needs some help to reintegrate into society. And we're seeing that on a a macro level with the U.S. government and the Israeli government. They see all, if someone's of Arab descent is Muslim, they're a terrorist. That's all there is to it. No questions asked. And this narrative is fostered in the media, maybe not as blatantly, but it's there. And this is what dehumanizes people and lets people think it's okay to kill innocent children, to bomb them to death.
And Muslim revert Jesuit priests went with the conquistadors because they were in charge. And that's why I went to Christian Brothers High School in Sacramento and not Jesuit High School. That's a joke, folks. But I did go to Christian Brothers. Robert Fantina, as we wrap this up, what are the 2 or 3 points you want this audience to take away from this conversation?
Well, first is that I think we have to recognize that international law trumps any domestic law. So if Israel several years ago declared itself the nation state of the Jewish people and only the Jewish people, which makes anyone else non-Jewish living in Israel a second-class citizen, that cannot stand. That there should be no second-class citizens anywhere in the world. So that's one thing. So international law, and everyone, the other thing is everyone, because they exist, is entitled to basic human rights. That means right to live, certainly, right to move about freely, right to get an education, to get employment, to travel, to live without fear. These are basic human rights that everyone is entitled to, and they're being deprived by many people. Many people don't have them around the world. In the Middle East right now, Israel and the United States are depriving many people of them. We could also talk about how the United States is depriving many people in the U.S. of those rights, but that's a topic for another program. So I think the two things are the importance of human rights and international law, and the fact that they're being violated by powerful Western countries and Israel today.
And final question, does the Israeli government represent its people, or are both Israelis and Palestinians suffering under policies that leave no one winning? Good question.
It is a good question. And unfortunately, there is a strong racist element throughout Israel. Now, we saw a lot of protests before the genocide against Netanyahu's proposed judicial overhaul, but we haven't seen major protests about the genocide. People are demanding that the hostages be released, that Netanyahu get them released. But as far as the fact of this genocide, people aren't objecting to it. Surveys have shown that Israelis think Israel is using appropriate force in its genocide against the Palestinian people. Now, anyone who can consider that appropriate force is not looking at justice. But one thing that Israeli people must know is that until there is peace with the Palestinians, until the Palestinians have been able to determine how they're going to live, Israel will never have peace. They can bomb as many people as they want, they can kill as many people as they want, but as long as the Palestinians, as long as the resistance, as long as there's oppression, then there's going to be resistance, and there will be no security for Israel until there is justice for everyone throughout the Middle East.
And this is the final point. Take Bubba G, take AIPAC out of the government. Folks, it is very important to understand how deeply AIPAC is involved. Go back to the April New York Times piece where AIPAC said they were going to invest $100 million. Now, this is not me being anti-Semitic. AIPAC themselves said they were going to invest $100 million into the Democratic primaries to unseat Democrats that they deemed not to be committed to the Zionist genocidal project. And Ralph Nader just published in his latest newspaper the list of Democrats in Congress receiving AIPAC money and how much they're receiving. Folks, it's dangerous. Robert, that let you respond to that. That'll get us an unemployed scholar again. Another $1.99. Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. Robert, that'll respond to that. That'll take us out. It's
interesting how the United States is always saying, "Oh, the they see Russian interference in U.S. elections, or they see Chinese interference in U.S. elections, and yet the Israeli government, through its lobbies, is able to interfere legally in U.S. elections in a huge, huge way and brag about officials they've defeated or officials they've had elected. And then once they get someone elected, they write legislation for that elected official to introduce in Congress. So why aren't any representatives screaming about Israeli interference in U.S. elections? And the reason is because they benefit financially from it.
And Cherie says, what would we do without Ralph Nader all these years? Well, you wouldn't have seatbelts in your cars. I can tell you that. I can tell you that. Robert Fantina, my dear brother, thank you so much, man. Great. Good to have you. Good to be in a space where now I can have you back, and look forward to having you back. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
And folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for new episodes every day. Also, please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Greatly, greatly appreciate the contributions that you all made today. Because again, I got to tell you, we're doing this for you, but we can't do this without you. Follow, subscribe, leave a review. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analytics of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And you can tell by this conversation with Robert Fantina, we don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. See you all again. Oh, Mark Sloboda is going to join us tomorrow to give you all the real deep dive into what's happening in Syria. Mark Sloboda joins us tomorrow from Moscow. See you tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great, great day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.